2 years into the war, President Lincoln decided to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st, 1863. And here's what the Emancipation Proclamation did: it freed all of the slaves in the Confederate States. So, one unique thing about that is that here are, of course, the border states: Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, Maryland, Delaware. So, as you recall, there were slaves in these border states, but they're part of the Union. So, the Emancipation Proclamation freed all of the slaves in the Confederacy, meaning that it did not free the slaves in Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, Maryland, Delaware. It freed all of the states again, all of the slaves, in the Confederate States. Why would Lincoln do this? Why did he issue the Emancipation Proclamation at this point? Well, Lincoln needed a new cause to kind of revive the fighting spirit. So now this war is not just about saving the Union. It's not just about states' rights. It's now also about freeing the slaves. He also was trying to encourage the Confederacy to give up. He wanted to see if maybe they would quit. Also, since the fighting is now meant to free slaves, a lot of blacks were now joining. Northern blacks, some southern that would break free, and overall 190,000 would join, which was a lot more troops. It really hurt the South's war effort as well. Many slaves would leave their masters. The slaves knew now that if they reached the North, they were free for sure. The fugitive slave law no longer applied. And it also really laid the foundation for the 13th Amendment, which would free slavery altogether, and it also eliminated the chance that Britain might get involved. Now there's no way. There wasn't much of a chance before, but at this point, there's no way they are. So the Emancipation Proclamation gets issued January 1st, 63, which frees all of the slaves in the Confederate States, a major step toward ending the practice of slavery in America. However, we still have a war to win. This is all kind of a moot point, right? If the North does not win. And so Lincoln and Grant and their strategy, they begin to fight a war of attrition. This meant wearing down the South until it was too poor, too tired, and too hungry to fight. Remember how the North has cut off all of the provisions and extra supplies coming in from foreigners? They were losing heart quickly in the South, and they're now fight this war of attrition. And General William Tecumseh Sherman is the one really identified most closely with this end of the war and this destructive nature that was so brutal. The majority of his march goes from Atlanta all the way down to Savannah, Georgia. Then he'll keep working his way up. But as he is marching, he is going to obviously defeat the Confederate army when he comes across them, but he's also going to burn homes, kill livestock, ruin farmland. Why would they do that? Why would they ruin those things? Because for the most part, the Confederate army is following them, and they want to get rid of any kind of food source, food supply. He also wants to really wear them down. Keep in mind, folks, as much as it sounds really awful, if the South had surrendered at any point, this would have all stopped. And so they're trying to get the South to surrender. They're not surrendering. So they keep pounding behind Sherman here. He was sent to destroy what he came into contact with. Sherman and his men completely destroyed Atlanta, leaving only ruins. Notice this picture down here of an old railroad depot. This is an actual photo down here. Just completely annihilated. It cut off all the railroad tracks, so supplies couldn't get to their troops and their men. And it was awful. Sherman sent out, this is in November of 64. Surrender is going to happen in April of 65. So we're close, that was 6 months away. He sends out 4 groups of men to destroy towns, farms, homes, again, going as far as he can until the South would surrender. Why? Why was Sherman so destructive? Well, Sherman destroyed what was left to make it impossible for the Confederate Army to chase him. They couldn't chase him, they had no supplies. Also, he's hoping that by destroying the spirit and resources of the area, Sherman was hoping to kind of push President Jefferson Davis of the Confederacy into surrendering. And Sherman's also under strict orders from Grant to destroy everything. What's the effect of this? Yes, it will help get to the surrender point, but I will tell you this march to the sea, Sherman's destructive nature, is going to create long-lasting bitterness in the South. Attitudes toward the North that would linger for decades following the war because of how cruel and how brutal he was. It certainly helped end the war. War's not over yet. We're getting closer. But it really helped to try to break the spirit. Now, unfortunately, during war, some things keep going. Elections. You have to pause for an election every now and then, and that's going to happen in 1864. We, of course, think of Abraham Lincoln as the great Abraham Lincoln and one of our top presidents of all time, but he wasn't always seen that way. He wasn't always viewed as Lincoln the Great. So he's going to run for re-election in 64. He's going to bring on a new vice president, candidate at least, a man named Andrew Johnson. Johnson is from Tennessee. He's hoping to bring someone in that the South might be okay with. Now, a very unique man's going to run against him, George C. McClellan. That's right, you guys are thinking about, you remember him right now. McClellan was the guy who was always so passive. He was never very aggressive, and he kind of drove Lincoln crazy. Lincoln ends up firing the guy. He's going to run against him as the Democrat and kind of like the peace ticket, the peace candidate. And even though Lincoln wasn't overly popular at the time, he still won by a large margin. Lincoln's going to win here 212 to 21 electoral votes. I do want to point out on the map, again, 212 to 21, Lincoln crushes McClellan. I want to point out the Confederate States. They were not allowed to vote. They did not have a vote in this election. They said they didn't want to be a part of the United States. Therefore, you can't vote. The territories still are not voting. But the blue states all went to Lincoln. Kentucky, New Jersey, Delaware went for McClellan. But again, 212 to 21, Lincoln wins by a landslide. And he will be president as we finish up the war.